Hello. So this is day 2 of our 3-day webinar, and part 2 is understanding the challenges of positive life change. Yesterday we talked about the trauma and empathy portions of recovery and how trauma and our empathy and our sensitivity, they all make sense in our journey, but I think we tend to underestimate the impact that those things have on our energy and our attempts to recover and the goals that we have. So we often neglect to honor our experience as trauma survivors, as trauma risers, people that are overcoming more than what would be called fair because of everything that we have to deal with and everything that we're processing in addition to just living life and just surviving. So today's portion, talking about the challenges of positive life change, that this would be true for anyone making positive changes. Yesterday, we were talking about the additional burden of having trauma and being empathic and all of that, even though empathy is actually a really beautiful thing. And even though it feels like weakness, sometimes feels like a disadvantage a lot of times, it is actually just a really beautiful thing. And my spiritual mentor, Amanda Flaker, has talked about how being empathic is actually being most human. The thing that makes humans different from, there's a fascination with AI and, maybe we would be more efficient and effective and all these things if we were more linear, logical, and those things are kind of worshipped by our culture. But it's the empathy that makes us human. It's the empathy that makes life beautiful. So that piece of it, the trauma recovery and the empathy, has only been in my awareness for maybe 6-7 years as a more prominent area of focus for myself. But longer than that was understanding the challenges of positive life change, because here I was in my early 20s asking this question: how do I become someone I've never been before? How do I experience a reality that I've never experienced before? And the reason I was asking that was because of my controlling home situation and all of those years, the first 22 years of my life, of my existence on the planet, I was micromanaged, I was controlled, I was experiencing my dad's anger and learning about things like how God only works through authority, so only my dad could decide what my life purpose was, and that was to basically be at home and support my family, support his business. And I was very trapped. And somebody was asking the other day, how does that happen? How do you just, why didn't you just rebel? And I literally had no contact with other adults without my dad present from like 11 or 12 on. And most of the time we were just in our home. And most of the time we were just doing our schoolwork, doing our chores, micromanaged at home. And we were taught that everyone else in the world, pretty much, was not following God's will, and therefore they were evil and wicked and displeasing to God, and our little family was like the only righteous ones. And so of course in my mind at the time I wanted to make God happy. I wanted to get his approval and get my dad's approval and all that. And so I just kept doing the next thing, and we only associated after age 12 with other families that were also homeschooling and doing the same, attempting the same type of life as we were. So that was literally all I knew. And those people from 12 to 22 were the only friends and associates that I had. So, and I was known as one of the Dunn boys, and we were the Dunn family, and that was it. So I think I mentioned yesterday that my dad told me I was lazy starting from the time I was six or seven, because of the fatigue that I felt. So that was throwing me off. And I didn't want to be lazy, so I did my best to pretend like I didn't have any energy issues, didn't have any thyroid issues, and I just carried on. And I wanted to make God happy, so I did what my dad said to do, and that was what I did. And so I just kept carrying on. So the thing that, you know, there was evidence along the way that my dad didn't really think too deeply about what he said. He said what was helpful in the moment versus what he actually meant. A small example would be like when we were little, my brother and I wanted a bow and arrow, and we were attempting to make bow and arrows with sticks and rubber bands. But we wanted to get a real one, and my dad said, when you're 12 years old, then you can get one. And then when we reminded him of that, when we were 12, I was 12 or he was 12, I can't remember. We're a year apart. I'm older. He said that he never said that, and we were way too immature to have that. So there was little signs that he didn't mean what he said. So a piece of that was just like one small example. But then as we went on, there were much bigger examples. But one of the things that I was told throughout my teens was that when I was 18, then I was going to be, and completed his requirements for graduation, then I was going to be free to pursue my dreams and follow what God had for me. And that was kind of something that I held on to, was that it wasn't worth it to me to make a fuss about how I was not able to do any of the things that I wanted to do. I wasn't even able to, allowed to read the books that I purchased along the way, because I loved history. I loved historical fiction. I was really interested in government, so I bought books on that, and political science, and I bought a video training series on debate for lawyers and government workers and stuff like that. And I thought that'd be really cool, and I wasn't allowed to watch that because my dad said I didn't need to be any better at arguing. And so there was so many things I was not allowed to do. I wasn't allowed to just read in general, like pleasure, like, because my dad said it was bad for my eyes and an escape from reality. And we weren't allowed to play sports because sports were distraction from Christ. We weren't allowed to exercise because exercise was honoring the body over the spirit. We didn't listen to music with drums in it, just hymns and classical music, and because drums were of the devil. Weren't allowed to wear tennis shoes or jeans or shorts, because that's what rebellious kids wear. Weren't allowed to play or chew gum or wear sunglasses, because the same thing, rebellious kids do that. Rollerblades. So we wore dress slacks and dress shoes and white shirt and tie, literally for schoolwork every day, or boots, cargo pants, and polos for chores and meal prep and stuff like that, because we were in charge of making meals. So here I was doing all of this into my 20s. And from what my dad said, the world outside of our home was evil and wicked, and if we were to engage with it, we would be lured away by Satan, and all of this. And my dad, basically the only plan, and I think I sidetracked myself there for a second, but so before I was 18, the story was that I was going to be released from his guidance, basically, and his control, once I was 18 and completed his requirements for graduation. And so I was like, okay, I'm okay with this control. I'm going to honor my dad, and then, I can wait until I'm 18. And when I was 18 and met all the requirements for graduation, there was something else that he wanted me to do, and then something else that he wanted me to do, and something else that he wanted me to do. And pretty soon he was not going to release control until he chose a wife for me. And he was not planning on doing that until my 30s. And I started getting really depressed. So the years from 18 to 22 were really dark, really, just really depressed years. But I was obsessed with this concept of making positive changes. Like, how do you become someone you've never been? How do you experience a reality that you've never experienced? And one of my heroes was, because the Bible was one of the few things we were able to study, was Joseph. And in that story in the Old Testament, he is the 11th of 12 sons. And he has these visions from early on that he's going to be a leader among his brothers, even though he was almost the youngest. And he had two of these visions. And then he was sold into slavery. And as a slave, he was purchased by Potiphar, who was kind of the manager of Pharaoh's house. And he kind of saw himself as a leader because of those visions that he had. And so he ended up getting promoted and promoted and promoted until he was in charge of Potiphar's house. He was the lead servant, head servant, over everything that Potiphar owned. And he actually knew more about what was going on in the house, Potiphar's household, than Potiphar did. And then Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him and he refused. And so then she falsely accused him of trying to seduce her, and he was put in jail. And again, he was kind of living out his visions of being a leader. And so he worked his way up, and pretty soon he was the lead in the prison. Even though he's a prisoner, he was in charge of everything. And then he was called in front of Pharaoh one day and said, I heard you can interpret dreams, because he interpreted dreams for a couple of other prisoners. And he said, can you interpret these 2 dreams for me? And he basically tells Pharaoh that these things are established and will happen because God gave him 2 dreams, multiplied it twice to him. And the only reason he believed that was because he had 2 dreams, but he hadn't actually experienced the full fulfillment of that yet. And so here he was as a slave, a foreigner, a prisoner, and he was telling the most powerful man in the world at the time that his dreams were going to come true because they were repeated twice. And he only knew that because his own dreams were repeated twice. And yet he hadn't had them fulfilled yet, but his faith was that strong. And then, of course, the next thing that happens is that he becomes the second most powerful leader in all of the land, and he is a ruler that his brothers come and bow down to, and all of his dreams were fulfilled. So at the time, that was like an encouraging story for me, because I thought, how do I get out of this situation where I'm a prisoner in my own home? And I thought, well, God can make a way for that. So then I was also studying early American history and the founding fathers and their understanding of rebellion, and when is it justified to disobey a ruler. And they actually had very biblical reasons for that. And I was able to kind of be sneaky and got my dad to approve this presentation that I wanted to make on the Revolutionary War and early American history and all that. And really what I was trying to study was the founding fathers' logic behind rebelling. Because I was realizing that I was kind of stuck in this space where I was going to have to rebel if I was going to live the life that I felt like I was created to live. My dad wasn't going to let me live my life. And so I got permission to study certain books that I had in order to create this presentation. And so that was another thing that was really encouraging to me at the time. How do I become someone I've never been? How do I take ownership of my life in this way? And I started doing it in these very subtle, under the radar ways. And was the kind of the final push that I had was that I realized that if I was going to continue to keep my dad, or try to make my dad happy, and continue to look like I was, to all of our extreme religious homeschooling friends, that I was doing the right thing before God, I was going to have to, continue to do whatever my dad wanted. And if I was just waiting for him to give me permission to live my life, it was never going to happen. I was going to, be continually resubmitting myself to my controlling dad over and over and over again until I was an old man. And I pictured, I pictured standing in front of the pearly gates and God asking, why didn't you use all the gifts that I gave you throughout your life? And my answer would have been, because my dad never let me. And I realized that I can't do that. So I have to be brave. I have to take a risk. And the actual risk that happened was driving into town without my dad's knowledge or permission or prayer of protection for the first time in my life at a couple weeks before my 22nd birthday, and talking to the Marine recruiter and him requesting that I come back for another follow-up visit, which I might not have gone back if he hadn't made me do that, because I always kept my word. So I told him I would come back, and I had to come back. So yeah, so that was the beginning of me choosing. That was the inciting incident, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. So this whole process is something that I've been fascinated with, and because I had to live it. Like, there was no one helping me, no one encouraging me, no one telling me how to be brave and do things I'd never done before, or like the person that I would have assumed knew me the best, my dad, told me I couldn't handle life without him. And for a long time I believed him. And then I began to wonder if he was right, and then I began to really question whether he was right, and then I began to doubt that he was right. And so everything that I did from 22 years old on was really overwhelming and scary, even though I was doing nothing unusual to most kids my age. But it was really scary because I'd been told my whole life that I wouldn't be able to handle it, and that I would be wrong for trying to do it on my own. So how do you become someone you've never been when everyone in your reality is telling you you can't be that person, and yet everything in you wants to be that person? How do you choose that? So this process of positive life change is really challenging, and we know it's challenging, but why is it challenging? It's almost a cultural cliche that New Year's resolutions are not going to be kept. It's like a joke almost most of the time that someone says, "Oh, I'm making this resolution, I'm going to do this," and people tease them about how long it's going to last, and then or they joke about a resolution that they had and they did for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and then they didn't keep it up. And they assume that it's all about willpower and just being determined enough and, just wanting it bad enough and all of that. But you can want something really bad and still not have it, because our self-identity is wrapped up in the patterns and habits that make up our daily life. And when we begin to abandon the patterns and habits that make us who we are, it's a very terrifying thing to our unconscious. It's absolutely overwhelming, because the consistency of the feedback of familiar things let us know that we are who we think we are, and that our perception is sane. It's like our mind is looking for confirmation that I know who I am. And even if something doesn't happen the way you want it to happen, when it happens the way you thought it would happen, which is what you didn't want to happen, you get confirmation, oh, I was right. And so that reassures your mind that you're sane, that you can predict something going terribly, and it goes terribly, and you were right. And even if it's not what you want. And so that's why it's really challenging. You know, apparently women leave their abusive spouse 7 times before leaving permanently on average. And that's because the unfamiliar is scarier than the abusive familiar. Dr. Joe Dispenza has made a career of studying belief and the power of belief and the placebo effect and nocebo effect. And he did that, he started that because of something that happened to him when he was in his early 20s. He had just graduated from chiropractic college and had started his practice, and he was in a triathlon. And at the bike portion of the triathlon, at this one part, and this was in LA, I think, and so it was like a very inner city, very populated, and there was a police officer that was standing watching traffic and kind of directing the racers through that intersection. And the police officer didn't see this SUV coming, and he got run over and broke, I can't remember which, if it was cervical or lumbar, but he broke a bunch of his vertebrae in his spine. And of course, he was rushed to the hospital, and the doctors suggested that he have a steel rod put into his spine because they didn't think that he would be able to ever walk again if he didn't have that. That was going to be his best chance. And he got a second and a third opinion, and they all confirmed the same thing, that he needed a steel rod in his spine. Well, he had just finished 4 years of chiropractic college studying the spine, and he just did not want to put a steel rod in his spine. And so he decided that he was going to just wait. And he couldn't move. He was strapped into his bed, and they probably rotated him or whatever, but in one of those special beds that rotates, kind of keeps you sandwiched together so you don't move your body, but rotate to avoid bed sores and stuff like that. But he just kind of on a whim decided to meditate 2 hours a day on a whole healthy spine. And so it's amazing that he had just spent 4 years studying the spine, and so he was really able to visualize a healthy working spine. And he did that for 2 hours a day, and 10 weeks later he was treating patients in his chiropractic office again. And he was really surprised at what had happened and decided to go back to school to become a neuroscientist to figure out what was going on, what happened. And since then, he's collected all of these stories about people who gave themselves diseases because they believed they had it and then found out that they didn't have it after they were dead from supposedly the disease. And other people who healed themselves because they believed they were healing and had the power to heal. And then now he runs these week-long camps and teaches people how to meditate. And he has a team of scientists that measure the participants at the beginning of the week and at the end of the week to see what are the physiological changes and benefits that are happening for these individuals because of their meditation and raising their vibration and all of this stuff. So he has a book called You Are the Placebo, another book called Becoming Supernatural, and another book called Breaking the Habit of Being You. And they're very powerful, very encouraging books, even just for the stories in there, let alone the science. So what he says is that that 95% of who we are by the age of 30 is automatic programming. We have become so similar each day in the thoughts that we think, the perspectives that we have about different subjects and about ourselves, and in the patterns of life that we hold, that 95% of everything that we do and say is very similar every single day. Only 5%, like 95% of all of our behavior is unconscious. Only 5% is conscious. And that's partly because we feel sane when things are familiar, and feel insane when things are unfamiliar, when we're being unfamiliar to ourselves. It's like when someone says to someone else, I don't even know who you are anymore. Or you say that to yourself, I don't know who I am anymore. That may actually be a good thing if you are being intentional about making positive changes and becoming someone you've not been. And the reason that making positive changes is so challenging is because you are not adding habits. You are actually becoming a different person. You're becoming someone you have not yet been. So in order to experience everything you dream of, and in order to experience the actual tangible goals that you have for yourself, you have to be open to change, have to be willing to be unmade, and you have to be okay with letting go of your identity, of who you think you are. So basically, you have to be the hero of your story. Because no one else can be the hero for you. This is all part of claiming your sovereignty. So sovereignty is the understanding that no one else on the planet is more responsible for me than me. And no one else is more responsible for making improvements and changes in my life than I am. And I think, especially if you grew up without healthy and conscious and conscientious and intentional parents, then a part of us is still waiting to experience that, because we know on some deep level that that's how life's supposed to be. We're supposed to have been cared for at some point. And a lot of us just never were. So we keep waiting for that, instead of realizing that it's brutal, it's unfair, but we have to be the hero of our own story. So when you are claiming your sovereignty and you're choosing your reality, the things that you dream of, because they're not yet part of your reality, feel like fantasy. And that may be one of the reasons I love fantasy so much. And I always have from a little kid, was, possibly because the life that I wanted felt like fantasy. And I loved reading about it. So keep fantasizing. Keep choosing to obsess about your fantasies. And I say obsess because it does take an obsession to kind of build the muscle, so to speak, of pushing through positive life change, because it's scary and it's overwhelming and it's very challenging, and everything in every part of your system is pushing you to stick to the status quo, stick with the familiar, because it is scary and overwhelming to be faced with everything unfamiliar. When you're going through an identity change, when you're going through metamorphosis, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, that caterpillar is completely unmade, and it's just soup in the chrysalis. And then it begins to be remade. And that's super scary. Like, nothing in your reality is familiar in those moments. And that's super overwhelming. But hold on to your vision, hold on to your dreams, hold on to your goals, and remind yourself every single moment what it is that you're doing all this for. So there were a couple of things that I realized as I was going through this process, and that was that I had a couple of emotional reasons that helped carry me. And I call them emotional reasons because it's not a logical reason. There's emotion to it, there's meaning to it. And I feel like we need something deeper than logic. It's like the person that goes to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, you've got type 2 diabetes, or you're gaining some weight, or your heart is having trouble, or something like that, and they're like, you really need to exercise. Well, that's just a logical reason. That's not necessarily an emotional reason. But if the doctor says you're going to die in 6 months if you don't make some changes, then wow, there's like a whole emotional reason for making the changes. And it's easier to make changes when you have an emotional reason versus a logical reason. So for me, there was a couple of things that were emotional reasons that motivated me to make these big changes. One was my health issues. So being weak and small and fatigued and unable to get stronger, and getting weaker and smaller when I did exercise consistently was super scary and overwhelming. So having all those years of trying to get stronger and only getting smaller, trying to gain more energy and only getting more fatigued, was repetitive and ever increasing emotional reason to be obsessed with my goals and with my dreams and my desires of experiencing some health and some freedom. And the other emotional reason was, and this is specifically for fitness, when I was 18, one of the things that my dad used to control me was telling me that I needed to take care of my grandfather when he had cancer of the larynx. Now, if he had asked me, it would have made a big difference. Instead of telling me, you will live with him and you will care for him. Because then he extended his control over me. And then the next thing was, I need you to work for me at Intel, where his contract was, because he was losing some employees. So he just kind of kept extending his control over me in that way. But regardless, I went to live with my grandfather when I was 18, my brother and I did, and he had cancer of the larynx, and we made his formula. We fed him through a stomach tube every hour during the day and every 2 hours at night, and my brother and I rotated, so we got up every 4 hours each. But we were also putting essential oils on his radiation burns, and kind of taking care of the house and driving him to all of his appointments and doing the grocery shopping for him and stuff like that. So that was such a motivational experience, because I was taking care of my grandfather while he was literally dying, and he did live through that experience and lived another decade or so. But he ended up losing his voice box and all this stuff because of the cancer. And I thought, I want to be as healthy as possible, as strong as possible. And so it took a while from that moment in order to be in tune with my body enough to figure out what kind of exercising worked for me. But even years later, as I started, now I can say that I've constantly prepped my own meals and consistently worked out for 19 solid years because of the emotional reasons. I want to be a really strong, really energetic old man. And that experience with my grandfather became an emotional reason for me to pursue health and fitness. So what are your emotional reasons for the positive changes in your life? And, it might be something different, like choosing a different job. And maybe you've been with a company for way longer than you ever wanted to be, and you don't enjoy your work, but you're just really overwhelmed, really scared with making a change. And yet, every part of your being knows that it would be better for you if you could do a different job. So, what's going to be the emotional reason for that? Maybe it's that you don't want your child to learn from your lived example and stay at a job that she hates for 20 years. And that's unhealthy for her. What about fitness? One of my clients that I had 12 years ago, she started working with me after her gastric bypass surgery, and she was incredible. Like, I've never seen anyone have gastric bypass surgery and have as successful a transformation and no relapse, because she was so motivated to exercise and strength train and change her eating patterns and all of that. And the thing that changed, that her emotional reason was, she had two small boys, and they were at a Halloween, like a pumpkin patch Halloween park thing, a farm, and there was this hay bale maze, and it was kind of this mountain, and you could crawl through and all that, and the boys were having so much fun crawling through, and they came out and said, "Mom, come on, play with us." And she got down and she couldn't fit into the tunnel, and it was like she hadn't been unaware of her weight before that, but that was a moment that highlighted her situation and how much she wanted something different to experience life with her boys. And that is the moment, that was the emotional reason that motivated her to actually follow through with everything that she had been probably thinking that she should do prior to that. So anchor into your emotional reasons. For someone, it might be they want to, get healthier and stronger, or make some changes because they want to be able to keep up with their grandkids at Disneyland for 3 days in a row. And, maybe their current situations, they couldn't do that. But that's an emotional reason, something to inspire them, intrinsically motivate them, not extrinsically push them to make some changes that would be helpful. And the other piece of being able to make these big changes and become the hero of your story is to nurture your hope. So believing that it's possible. I had never been told by any medical professional that I could get off of thyroid medication before I actually got off of thyroid medication, because no one believed it. And yet I thought, I just can't not believe that the body is able to heal. And so I kept hope alive that I could experience something that I had never experienced, and that I could experience something that I was being told I would never experience. So part of this process, becoming the hero of your story it sounds amazing and it's awesome to watch in Marvel movies, but it's really, really, really challenging to live that experience. And it's awesome to watch someone else live that experience, but it's really challenging and overwhelming to actually be the one living that experience and transforming yourself, because it's so uncomfortable. So I realized early on I had to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because everything that I did was scary and super uncomfortable, and everything that I wanted was way, way outside of my comfort zone. So going to the Marine Recruiter, going to MEPS, the military entrance processing station, going to boot camp was terrifying. Felt like a different planet, like literally hell on earth. Going through all the training, coming back, having to get jobs, working through a temp agency, starting massage school, working at the massage school, and then moving to another town to live with my grandmother, and working at Target, and working at a salon, and working at the YMCA, and just like all these things were all just so foreign to me. And, I didn't even witness anyone else doing stuff like this. I was just sheltered at home for 22 years, not having any kind of experience outside the home or building friendships, building my own life or preferences or anything. So super overwhelming. Everything was uncomfortable. Everything was scary. And yet I knew that everything that I wanted was on the other side of the fear. So a book that was really powerful for me, a friend gave it to me. It's called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years by Donald Miller. And this book is all about story. Donald Miller had written some previous books, and he was contacted by movie producers that wanted to turn one of his previous books, into a movie. And so in this book, he writes about that experience of having a piece of his life being turned into a movie. And he learned to what makes a good story, what makes a great story, and what are the elements of a good story that people are going to come to the movie theater and pay money to watch. Because he talks about how we want our lives to be comfortable. And yet that, a comfortable life is a very boring story. So if someone was able to, I think it's in the first, in the preface or whatever, he talks about going to a movie to watch a story about a guy that really wants a certain car, and he goes to his job every day, and he saves up his money, and he finally has enough money, and he goes to the car lot, and he picks out the car that he wants, and he pays cash for it, and he drives off testing his new windshield wipers. And if that was the whole story, most people would want their money back and just think that was a stupid story. Because what makes a great story? It's all about overcoming. It's about a challenge that has to be overcome, and the main character has to transform in the process of pursuing their goals and their quest. One of the things he talks about is an inciting incident. So that is when the story changes for the main character. So an inciting incident is something that happens that pushes the main character past the point of any return. So my inciting incident initially from my home was going to the Marine recruiter and saying that yes, I would meet the Marine recruiter again. Because then I had to show my family the Marine pamphlet, the propaganda, and say, hey, I have a follow-up appointment and I'm going to be considering joining the Marines. And that was something that there was no recovery from in my story. And in his book, Donald Miller talks about there were a few times that he decided to practice these principles, like not wait for something to happen to him, but actually choose inciting incidents. And one of the things that he did was sign up to hike Machu Picchu in South America, and he signed up with a bunch of friends from church, including a girl that he was really interested in. And so from that moment on, he had like X amount of weeks to get ready for this tremendous hike that was going to take days, or he was going to be absolutely embarrassed and humiliated in front of these people that he knew and this girl that he really, really, really liked. And so that was something that made him change it when nothing else would have. And then later on, he signed up for a cross the US bike ride, which he also had to train for. And then another time he signed up for a kayak trip, like a 10-day kayak trip up in Alaska. And so he had to prepare for that. So those were some amazing, inspiring examples. And this book gave me the courage to take some big leaps, like when I decided to quit a job that I'd had for 4 years, and I was the lead health and fitness specialist, and everything looked really amazing on the outside, but I had some of my best friends in that season all moved away, and I was feeling very alone, and so this book and those circumstances gave me the courage to apply for a job in Michigan when I only knew one person, and not that person I didn't know very well. But I went to a completely different part of the country by myself where I didn't know anybody to take a fitness center supervisor position at this new facility. And it was like really overwhelming and scary and way harder than I even thought it was going to be. And yet it turned out to be an amazing, powerful opportunity. And then a couple of years later, I quit that job because I felt inspired to do that, and bought a truck and a travel trailer and took off around the country for 2 months on my way back to Oregon, trusting that everything would work out. And I would not have had the courage to do that years before, but I feel like throughout my life, I've taken bigger and bigger and bigger risks to pursue things that I dream of because I am committed to stepping out of my comfort zone and experiencing things I've never experienced before. Choosing inciting incidents so that I can grow and expand and become someone I've not yet been. So Thomas Jefferson is quoted as saying, if you want something you've never had, you must do something you've never done. And something that I realized when I was younger, going through these early change processes, was that I must become temporarily okay with being unfamiliar with myself until this new self becomes me. I have to be okay with being a stranger to me until that stranger becomes me. because otherwise I will stay exactly the same as I've always been. I love Brandon Sanderson as an author. His Stormlight Archive is absolutely brilliant and amazing. I highly recommend it. The first book is The Way of Kings, but somewhere in the books, I can't remember, there's 4 of them in the series so far. One of the characters says, sometimes a hypocrite is nothing more than a person who is in the process of changing. And I love that so much, because we can feel like we are being inauthentic, we are being a hypocrite when we decide that we are now going to suddenly be something that we've never been before, and we're going to try to act in a new way that we haven't acted before, and we suddenly have these new standards and new expectations that we've never had before, and we decide that we're going to choose a better way of life and choose something new, and I'm going to assert my power. I'm going to assert my sovereignty. I'm going to be powerful, and maybe we haven't been that before, and it feels hypocritical and inauthentic, and yet the very notion of sovereignty is I get to change my mind. And I started understanding that from consent topics, like articles and conversations about consent. So, like, what does it mean to actually have consent in a situation? A lot of times it's about sexual consent, So rape is something where one person doesn't really want to do it and the other person does. And sometimes you go along with it because you don't want to cause any issues, but you are not giving full, authentic consent. So full, authentic consent means, yes, I want this. If it's I don't know, then it's not consent. Consent means I want this. I'm choosing this in this moment. And it also means that if at any moment after that first moment when you say yes, that you realize I don't want this anymore, you as a sovereign being get to change your mind. And that relates to having a job, relationship, any kind of agreement that you might have in your life. You can unmake that when you realize that it's no longer something that you feel aligned with, something that you desire, something you're saying yes to. So sovereignty means that you get to change your mind. And it's not hypocritical, it's not inauthentic to be aligned with yourself moment by moment. And as we talked about yesterday, self-compassion is more powerful than self-control or self-discipline for this process, because it is scary, it is overwhelming, and it is uncertain. So have self-compassion all along the way. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And so practicing becoming your own cheerleader, your own best friend, giving yourself pep talks when you've got no one else in your corner, no one else that understands what you're pursuing or what you're dreaming of, is so critical. So what is the positive life change process? And I believe there are 6 aspects of this. So first, holding a vision of what you want and allowing yourself to get obsessed with your dreams and desires. 2, building habits that will remake you into the new you. What are the habits of the person you want to be? 3, embracing being uncomfortable as you are unmade and remade into new ways of being and thinking. The risks are worth it. Number 4, having compassion on yourself and honoring your needs while holding to your goals. Have compassion on yourself and honor your needs while holding to your goals. You may need a break here and there, but hold on to your goals. 5, celebrating and reveling in your growth as you transform into a new self and expand your comfort zone to include new things that it didn't used to include. So celebrate and revel in your growth. And then 6, staying in tune with your heart, ready to repeat this cycle as you experience new urges for expansion. And I believe this process is something that we experience over and over in every area of life, as long as we are continuing to grow and expand. And some people choose not to. And there's a quote about people reaching 27 years old or whatever, and then living the rest of their life as a dead man, even if they live to be 70, because they repeat the same things and repeat the same year, and they stay the same person every single year for all those years. So being like a child, being a student, being a learner, being humble, being willing to grow and expand and experience new scary things is what we came here to do. So I hope this is encouraging. I hope this expands your vision for experiencing uncomfortable things in your life as you choose to grow and choose to pursue your goals and your dreams. Tomorrow we're talking about very practical things. So we're going to talk about utilizing proven vitality keys for empaths. So I hope that you tune in for that. Yesterday we talked about the challenges of being an empath, of being a trauma survivor, and how that impacts health. Today we're talking about just the general topic of positive life changes. And some of those challenges are being empathic and having trauma. And trust me, I have panic attacks regularly because of my trauma. But I know what I desire for myself and the dreams that I have. So then tomorrow, we're talking about all of the practical things that I have seen to be most effective for someone who has experienced trauma and is empathic. Like, how do you maximize the effective parts, and how do you minimize the toxic parts as you move forward? So hope you have a great night. Check out my website for my services if you want to connect more, and we'll talk soon.